Good morning, AFT. To President Randi Weingarten, Executive Vice President Evelyn DeJesus, Secretary Treasurer Dr. Lorretta Johnson, the members of AFT Executive Committee, and all who join us today. I thank you for this opportunity to be with you as we kick off the AFT's first virtual convention. There is an East African community where they greet each other with a question. Simply translated, it is, and how are the children? Not how are you, or how's it going, or how's business, or how do you like this weather? No, they greet each other with the question, and how are the children? The hoped for response is, all the children are well. Not my children, but all the children are well. Such is their concern and care for the next generation of their communities that they ground themselves and center this concern even in the greeting of the day. And how are the children? All the children are well. They understand that unless the children are well, the family is not well. Unless the children are well, the community is not well. Unless the children are well, the nation is not well. Let us ask ourselves this question, and how are the children? Are the children well? Sadly, our answer today must be no, not all the children are well. Not all the children are well. Of course, there are some few who have all the protections, all the love, all the supports they need to live full, healthy, happy, and productive lives. But too many others are separated from their dreams and their goals, from health and wellness, from love and support, because of systems that are not designed to address their needs, because of infrastructure that is not able to provide the proper supports, because of the callousness and carelessness of those in power who refuse to see them, who refuse to honor them, to respect them, to value them, who refuse to see all the children, to honor all the children, to value all the children. If our families, our communities, our nation is to be whole, is to be prosperous, is to live up to the full meaning of its creed, then we must turn our attention to the children, all the children, all the people in our society who are living at the margins, who move among us unseen and unheard, those who need our protections most, the weak, the invisible, the vulnerable. We must give our attention to the children, all of the children, regardless of race and gender, sexual orientation or identity, regardless of national origin or immigration status, regardless of income, regardless of zip code, regardless of name, lineage, or heritage. And indeed, this is the path that you have chosen. The promise that you made as a union of professionals, as teachers and healthcare workers, to care for the most vulnerable in our society, to protect them and defend them, to honor and respect them, to see them and to hear them, to be strength for the weak, a voice for the voiceless, hope for the hopeless, a path through the wilderness, and a light shining through the darkness. It is not and it will not be an easy task, this path that you have chosen, but you already know that. You did not choose to be a teacher or a healthcare worker because you thought it would be an easy job. No, you chose it because you had a calling. You saw a need and you rose to meet the challenge. As we gather these next few days, we ask for divine grace to help us remember our calling, to remember our vow to serve all the children, to serve the least, the last, and the lost, the left out, the locked out, and the left behind, to be their voice, to be their hope, to be their strength, to be their light, to fight for them with compassion and with conviction until the promise of America becomes the practice of America, until all the children are well, until all the children are well, until all the children are well. Amen. Ashe. Amen.
Good morning. My name is Wayne Spence, and I am the president of my local 4053, the New York State Public Employees Federation, which is made up of 52,000 members with over 3,000 professional, scientific, and technical titles in New York State government. I am honored to be here today to introduce our president, Randi Weingarten. Randi has been a tremendous help to PEF over the past years, but these last few months have been extraordinary. And it made me especially grateful for her leadership and her friendship. To give you an idea of my background, I'm an immigrant. I came to the US from the island of Jamaica when I was 10 years old. I am a product of the New York City public school system and a proud graduate of the Bronx High School of Science. And I have a degree in electrical engineering, but I work in law enforcement. Like some of the members that I represent, I am a parole officer. I'm proud of it. What pushed me to choose that path was being arrested in 1986 in Davie, Florida, on a traffic citation when I went down on spring break like so many college students do back then. I was a junior in college at the time, and that event changed my life. I spent 2 nights in jail for a traffic citation. My family had no idea where I was, and in fact, they were given false information as to where I was being held. They had my family looking in one county when I was being held in another county, based on information that the arresting officer had given my family in order to bail me out. And when I finally went in front of the judge, he said he didn't understand the reason for my arrest. He said for a traffic citation, there was no reason for me to be arrested. I could have been given a ticket. But when he realized that what had happened, I'll never forget what he said. Oh, you were arrested in Davie. They don't like black people there. What a shock for me. That experience made me decide to pursue law enforcement, to try and make a difference for the better. I never wanted to be on the other end of those handcuffs. That's how much uh, that night, those last few nights made a difference in my life. So you can imagine that the murder of George Floyd and the protest and everything that has happened lately has been intensely emotional for me. On the one hand, I know from experience that most police officers are not like the ones who took part in that act. Most are good and decent men and women who respect the communities that they are sworn to protect and serve. On the other hand, I've personally been on the receiving end of racist policing, and it was frightening and it changed me forever. The difference this time is that we're all finally coming to accept what black people in this country has known forever, which is that a normal, everyday thing like jogging, driving, bird watching, sitting in your apartment, sleeping in your bed can suddenly turn deadly if you happen to be black. So, yes, I took part in the protest in my neighborhood because even as a law enforcement officer, it's clear to me that we are at a crisis point and there needs to be very serious reform of our policing and criminal justice system. There are strong feelings on either issue. You know, believe me, I've gotten some very fiery emails lately from PEF members on both sides. And this brings me back to Randi Weingarten. Randi and the AFT are assisting us in starting these difficult but necessary conversations. Her willingness to walk the walk on racism is inspiring. I'm also, I just can't stop commending the work that AFT has done to end the school-to-prison pipeline, and to stop the criminalization of Black youth. This is how we ensure that there will be no more George Floyds. Lastly, I have to say a few words about the last few months. I mean, everything changed in March because they have been filled with so many amazing examples of Randi's courage and stalwart support. Back in early March, I remembered calling her late one night about PEF nurses and law enforcement officers who were tasked with testing people in New York Shell area, the first epicenter of the COVID pandemic in New York State. There was great concern over the lack of PPE. Randi quickly helped us organize several town hall style conferences calls for nurses, other essential workers like mental health and social workers, probation and parole officers, and teachers that PEF represent in a non-traditional setting, whether it be mental health facilities, correctional facilities, or facilities with folks who have emotional disabilities. I recall telling her about nurses at Stony Brook Hospital on Long Island and at SUNY Downstate Medical Center in Brooklyn, who did not even have masks, and how they had been told to use one N95 mask per week. Unacceptable. I told her how some PEF members were working in residential drug treatment centers and were given instruction on how to make a mask out of a coffee filter. Unacceptable. When she heard that, Randi went into action. Thanks to her efforts, AFT sourced, purchased, transported, and donated 40,000 surgical masks to PEF for distribution to our frontline workers in the hardest hit areas of New York State, which she personally delivered to us in New York City in April. And I know she did the same for other locals across the country. That kind of dedication to the well-being of working people will stay in my heart forever. I am just so grateful to her and her efforts. So, without further ado, it's an honor and a privilege, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you the president of AFT and my good friend, Randi Weingarten. Thank you.
Welcome, delegates, to this very brave new world of unprecedented new normal. And I want to say thank you to Wayne, and I want to say thank you to all the delegates in this new virtual convention we are in. I also want to thank Evelyn de Jesus, our Executive Vice President, who's never stopped fighting for justice and who is a COVID survivor. And I want to, as I'm making sure that I keep on washing my hands, I want to thank the iconic Dr. Lorretta Johnson. I also want to thank Leah Daughtry, Reverend Daughtry, for starting us off today. These are amazing, amazing people, Leah, Wayne, Evelyn. But let me talk about Lorretta for a second. Lorretta started her career in 1966 as a teacher's aide in Baltimore. Today, she is the Secretary-Treasurer of the 1.7 million member American Federation of Teachers. Through it all, Lorretta has fought for racial equity and a better life for our members, our community, and of course, as Leah just said before, our children. And while we will honor Lorretta on her retirement with the Bayard Rustin Award later today, I couldn't speak without thanking my beloved friend, mentor, and partner, Dr. J. Since the founding of our union, the only time the AFT did not gather in person for a convention was during World War II, until now. Today, we don't face a world at war, but we do face an America in crisis. In fact, 3 crises: a public health crisis, an economic crisis, and a long overdue reckoning with the crisis of racism, all made worse by the current president. Let's start with the public health crisis, the coronavirus pandemic. The AFT started the alarm about this virus back in February. I called on the Trump administration to act with greater urgency while there was still time to prevent the spread. We asked for a proactive response for the CDC, OSHA, HHS, and the rest of the federal government to coordinate, inform, and protect the public. Yes, I did not just forget the Department of Education. We knew they would never do it. But a month later, when the gravity of the situation was clear, President Trump insisted, and I quote, "Pretty soon, it's going to be only 5 people. One day, it's like a miracle. It will disappear." President Trump's response has been chaotic and catastrophic. Instead of deploying the public health tools at his disposal, he's downplayed the threat, dismissed the advice of our nation's top scientists and public health experts, and rushed to reopen. And now he wants to stop testing and hide data about how bad the pandemic is. He tried to smear Dr. Anthony Fauci. Mr. President, attack the virus, not the people fighting the virus. And, by the way, Dr. Fauci will join us in a town hall with our members tonight, 6:45 Eastern Standard Time, Facebook Live. What's the price for President Trump's failed response? The virus is rising in 40 of the 50 states. Depression-level unemployment, family businesses going under, homelessness, hunger, and millions losing health insurance. As if that wasn't enough, this president is still trying to overturn the Affordable Care Act and strip healthcare protections, from millions of Americans with pre-existing conditions, and that's in the middle of a pandemic. As for his claim that pretty soon there'd just be 5 cases of coronavirus, more than 150,000 people have died from COVID-19 in the United States, which now has more coronavirus infections and deaths than any other country. Make no mistake, in the United States, the war against COVID-19 was lost from top down and is still being lost. This isn't for lack of dedicated health professionals, world-renowned medical institutions, or esteemed infectious disease scientists, and the AFT is honored to represent more than 200,000 of these incredible health professionals. AFT members have been on the front lines, protecting, educating, feeding, and caring for others. Teachers, paraprofessionals, and professors shifted to remote instruction in a nanosecond in an incredible display of dedication and flexibility across the country. Take Michelle Bushy, who is a high school biology teacher in Saranac, New York. When she found that her students didn't have internet access, obviously, online learning didn't work. So, she spent hours each day calling students to provide alternative instruction, all the while helping her own second-grade daughter learn remotely. Sound familiar? Bus drivers and food service workers scrambled to ensure families get grab-and-go meals all across the country. Take Yolanda Fisher, a school food service manager and member of Alliance AFT in Dallas. She and her colleagues have been preparing and distributing up to 1,000 meals each day because they know without those meals, students go hungry. Social workers, juvenile justice workers, and workers in prisons braved risk because they knew that's what was called for. And again, I want to thank Wayne and all of his members for all the work they have done in those congregate care facilities throughout New York State. And then there were, and are, the nurses, the EMTs, the doctors, the orderlies, the respiratory techs, all putting their health and lives at risk, often without adequate personal protective equipment. As Jose de Jesus, a registered nurse and member of Health Professionals and Allied Employees in New Jersey said, caring for patients with COVID-19 is exhausting, frustrating, and scary, but it is our oath and our calling. I'm sure you've seen the photos of nurses resorting to protecting themselves by wearing trash bags. The calls I've had with our healthcare members have been agonizing and heartbreaking. So as Wayne said in his introduction, the AFT stepped in, and I became a supply clerk. With a handful of AFT staff, we scoured the globe, and I mean the globe, for protective masks, face shields, and other PPE. And ultimately, we secured more than 50,000 face shields, 500,000 N95 respirators, and more than 1 million surgical masks to protect our frontline members. And then we sent them to our affiliates as quickly as possible, to our nurses in Washington State, who were at the epicenter early in the COVID-19 crisis, to our Ohio Nurses Association, to AFT Connecticut, PEF in New York, and across the country. And now that PPE shortages are flaring up again, we'll source more if we have to. I welcome the newfound respect America has for the extraordinary work our members do. The billboards honoring healthcare workers, and the memes of parents realizing teaching is so hard. But I mourn those we have lost. More than 200 members of our union have lost their lives to COVID-19. Jonathan Coelho was a probation officer in Danbury, Connecticut. The day he was intubated, he wrote his wife and their young children about how lucky he was to be in their lives. He died the next day, 32 years old. Gabrielle Gale was a 4th grade special ed teacher and union delegate in Queens, New York. Gabi and her husband were expecting their 2nd child when she died. Elva Graveline was a certified nurse assistant in Connecticut. She worked in the respiratory unit, literally on the front lines when COVID hit her community. And in working to save the lives of others, she lost her own. I was blessed to cry with her family in June. We mourn them, and we remember them. At this time of so much loss, there are others we must remember, whose names we must say. Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Philando Castile, Eric Garner, George Floyd, murdered while sleeping, while jogging, while driving, because they were Black. We must confront the racism that cost them their lives, and that is one of our nation's original sins. Racial bias is not only evident in one man's knee on another man's neck, it is built into virtually every system in the United States. It's evident in underfunded schools, voter suppression, substandard housing, healthcare, and transportation, low wages and high unemployment, discriminatory policing, and mass incarceration. And in racial health disparities that existed long before COVID-19 started taking Black and brown lives at much higher rates than for white people. Higher infant mortality, more premature deaths, more exposure to unsafe water, unhealthy air, and the environmental conditions that cause asthma. Let's face the truth. Many Black Americans have been struggling to breathe long before the murders of Eric Garner and George Floyd. Donald Trump did not invent racial injustice, but he has fanned the flames of prejudice and made the divisions in our country much, much worse. The Muslim ban, the border wall, calling white supremacists very fine people, and blaming Chinese people for COVID-19. This is a moment of reckoning that requires all of us to act. An act so many of us have. The diversity of those who have protested and taken action gives me hope that America can shed the shameful indifference to the value of Black lives. And they give us proof that progress is possible. From the cities that have banned the use of chokeholds by police, to changes in the use of force guidelines, to the adoption of duty to intervene rules, we're seeing some long overdue progress in policing. That's necessary, but not nearly sufficient. We must protect the right that underpins every other, the right to vote. We must secure justice for the most vulnerable, whether it's a trans teenager or the countless Native American families for whom extreme inequality is part of their everyday existence. Children should never be caged. Families belong together, and Dreamers' home is here. The AFT is trying to do our part. Our Executive Council passed a resolution in June laying out 19 commitments to combat systemic racism and violence against Black people. It calls for the separation of school safety from police departments and help for school staff to address the needs of children who suffer racial trauma. We'll convene a nationwide conversation on how to transform school security, led by longtime leader from the UFT, Leroy Barr. We're continuing the work of the AFT Latino Task Force, and we are creating the AFT Asian and Pacific Islander Task Force. And anti-racism training will be part of all AFT leadership training. In the labor movement, we often talk about turning moments into transformative movements. We must transform America, as Langston Hughes wrote, into the land that never has been yet, and yet must be, the land where every man is free. Free to walk the streets, free to jog, to drive, to learn, without fear and with true equality. The pandemic has exacerbated another pre-existing condition in America, extreme income inequality. Even before the pandemic hit, 78% of Americans were living paycheck to paycheck. 40% of Americans couldn't cover a $400 emergency. 30 million children relied on school meals. 20% of the country's 43 million federal student loan borrowers were in default. And then COVID hit. As this pandemic batters the United States, we are all in the same storm, but we are far from being in the same boat. Since COVID erupted, 45 million Americans lost their jobs. 1.5 million more children are going hungry. And the billionaires? U.S. billionaires added $584 billion to their own wealth. 1 in 5 workers is either on unemployment or waiting for their claim to be approved, and those benefits will run out in 2 days. State and local budgets are cratering. Almost 1 million people who work in schools and colleges have already lost their jobs in this recession, and 1.4 million more educators will lose their jobs if the Senate continues to refuse states and schools the funds they need for essential services. Donald Trump desperately wanted to stake his presidency on a strong economy, but history will show that this downturn was so much worse than it needed to be, and that so many more people lost their jobs because Donald Trump is so bad at his. Americans get this. The majority believe the country is on the wrong track and that we must do better. Just like the New Deal and the Great Society, we know that bold action is needed to achieve the economy and society that we have long championed. A society in which people have the opportunity to attain a better life, good jobs with a living wage and a union, adequate health care and housing, child care and retirement, a healthy and sustainable environment, and justice for all. And that starts with education, pre-K through post-secondary. And our public schools, which are a foundation of our democracy, must be excellent for all, equitable for all, and empowering for all. But first, they must reopen safely. We know that kids need in-person learning and that remote instruction is no substitute for it, but it has to be safe. That's why the AFT has been planning for school buildings to reopen since they closed. Back in April, we issued our plan to safely reopen America's schools and communities. It's based on science and public health protocols, as well as educator, school staff, and healthcare expertise. Our plan details 3 conditions essential for school buildings to reopen. First, low infection rates and adequate testing in any region where in-school learning is being considered. To state the obvious, we cannot rebuild the economy, including reopening schools, until we get the virus under control. Second, public health safeguards, starting with masks and social distancing, cleaning and ventilation, hand washing, and reasonable accommodations for those at risk. And third, I can't believe I have to say this, the necessary resources to enact each and every one of these safeguards, as well as the supports for meeting kids' academic, social, and emotional needs. And because states have been so badly hit, federal resources are absolutely essential. And parents, students, school staff, and their unions have to be involved, not sidelined. While safety must be the main consideration, there is no one-size-fits-all approach to school reopening. Public schools in Montana have reopened with the necessary spacing and other safeguards. But that's not possible in places where COVID is surging. That's why school districts like those in Atlanta, Houston, and Los Angeles have been forced to make the difficult decision to start schools remotely. But in Florida, despite the state's surging COVID infection rates, the governor is ordering all public schools to fully reopen in August. So, last week, with our help, the Florida Education Association filed a lawsuit against Governor DeSantis. The right wing predictably lashed out at teachers and their unions, claiming we don't want to be back in work. It's just ridiculous. Not a word about the resources or conditions we need, or Trump's mishandling of the crisis, or all the work we're doing across the country to plan for a safe return. In New York City, for example, the United Federation of Teachers has negotiated an agreement on a package of protocols, including PPE, medical accommodations for staff, social distancing, cleaning, disinfecting, and scheduling for blended instruction. And there's a new push for community schools and wraparound services all throughout New York State. Unions in Massachusetts advocated for a phased reopening that starts with school staff having time together to prepare for the resumption of schools, and the state has just agreed to that. Then educators and school staff checking in with students and families to assess their basic needs would happen next, including the basic needs of emotional health. And then third, resuming instructing and learning, whether in person, remote, or hybrid. I don't know how many times I have to say this. School districts are immobilized by lack of funding and lack of space, by windows that don't open and bathrooms without soap. The average school will need at least $1.2 million or $2,300 per student to open its doors safely. Assuming no other budget cuts, that's at least $116 billion to have the resources to protect the health of students, staff, and families, to have the supports to meet every child where they are and to advance every child's learning and development. But of course, in this recession, there have been budget cuts, draconian cuts. So in this recession, the only source for that funding is the federal government. The House of Representatives did its job. They passed the HEROES Act in May, that COVID relief and recovery package, which included $1 trillion for states and localities, including $100 billion for K-12 public schools, higher education, and HBCUs, and $50 billion for childcare. It shores up health care from Medicaid to preventing the closure of more rural hospitals, and it requires OSHA to do its job. The HEROES Act also defends the right to vote, extends unemployment insurance, and protects renters and homeowners from eviction. What did Mitch McConnell do? He scoffed at the aid state needs. He said states should go bankrupt. Then, as parents and teachers around the country were grappling with how to start school in the fall, McConnell went on vacation. These funds should have been distributed to communities months ago. How dare Mitch McConnell stonewall and stall this aid? And how dare President Trump tweet, in all caps, schools must open in the fall, with no plan, no funding, and no idea what he's talking about. The hypocrisy of canceling the GOP convention in Jacksonville, Florida, because of the risk to GOP delegates gathering in that Florida hotspot, yet in the same breath demanding that children and teachers gather in schools in that same hotspot. Why would anyone trust President Trump with reopening schools when he has mishandled everything else about the coronavirus? Why would anyone trust Betsy DeVos, who has zero credibility about how public schools actually work? Why would anyone try to reopen schools through force and threats without a plan and without resources? Unless all they wanted was to create chaos so it would fail. Before the virus's resurgence, and before Trump and DeVos's reckless open or else threats, 76% of AFT members polled in June said they were comfortable returning to school buildings if the proper safeguards were in place. Now, they're angry and afraid. Many are quitting, retiring, or writing their wills. Parents are afraid and angry too. A recent AP poll shows that the majority of Americans think that school buildings should only reopen with major adjustments or revert to remote instruction. 90% say that. Let's be clear. Just as we have done with our healthcare workers, we will fight on all fronts for the safety of students and their educators. But if the authorities don't protect the safety and health of those we represent and those we serve, as our Executive Council voted last week, nothing is off the table. That advocacy or protests, negotiations, grievances, or lawsuits, or if necessary and authorized by a local union, as a last resort, safety strikes. It's the 11th hour. We need the resources now. Our message has gotten through, but we haven't gotten what we need. Members like you have made calls and sent letters to your senators, tens and thousands of them. We can't let up now. Keep calling, keep writing. If the federal government, the one to which we pay taxes, can send a life raft to the cruise industry, give hedge funds a free lunch, and offer a tidy handout to Kanye and the Kushner family, they sure as hell can help working families and help educators ensure our kids get the education they need. As the coronavirus has affected us, as our country confronts these three generation-defining crises, a public health crisis, an economic crisis, and a crisis of racial justice, one factor, one person is making them all worse: Donald J. Trump. Donald Trump told us who he is. In the first moments of his presidency, he spoke of American carnage. He intended it as an insult to his predecessor, but it turns out to have been a prediction. He caged children and tore families apart. He tear-gassed peaceful protesters for a photo op and sent federal forces to Portland, uninvited, to incite violence. He gave Vladimir Putin a pass for putting bounties on American troops. As the economy slumps and COVID death spikes, President Trump has chosen to be the commander-in-chief of a culture war, not the consoler-in-chief to a nation in pain. He called peaceful protesters calling for racial justice terrorists. He denies the fact that Confederate symbols and statues celebrate slavery and racial terror. He ranted that, and I quote, "Our children are taught in school to hate their own country." Do you recognize his dystopian portrayal of America? Of the public schools where you foster the freedom to think, to hope, and to learn? Of course not, because this is just another of the 20,000 documented lies that have come out of Trump's mouth since he's became president. It's no wonder that a majority of Americans say Trump's handling of his job as president has been irresponsible, self-absorbed, chaotic, unprepared, and out of control. It's no wonder that historians are sounding the alarm about the threat he poses to democracy. How many scholars do we need to tell us that when you lose democracy, it's gone? How much history do we need to learn to know it can repeat itself? Democracy is on the ballot. It's not enough just to defeat Donald Trump. We must write the course of our country and reimagine a better, more equitable future. Of course, that's what we try to do as a union. Just this year, we've helped AFT members reduce their student debt by millions of dollars. We've provided a new trauma benefit, and we're offering Innovation Fund grants to help members teach in a changed environment. We'll do our part. But we need partners on school boards, in state houses, and in the White House. And Joe Biden will be a true partner. Before the pandemic, the 2020 election was about the soul of our country. Now, it's about our soul, our safety, our freedoms, our economic future, justice, and a whole lot more. Our presidential endorsement process this cycle was designed to engage more of our members than ever before, and it did. And after all the member town halls and listening sessions with the candidates, when it's time to come together, the AFT Executive Council gave Joe Biden a rousing endorsement because he is the experienced and caring leader our country needs right now. We got a choice between two people and two visions for America that couldn't be more different. Joe Biden is deeply decent, and when he's made mistakes, he's learned and grown from them. He is honest. In every dealing we've had, his word has been his bond. In fact, as I've said before, he was our go-to person in the Obama administration. He gets things done. President Obama looked to Vice President Biden on everything from taking on gun violence to foreign policy. As Vice President, he helped fight a national health crisis and climb out of recession, and as President, he'll do it again. But there's something else that really matters at this moment, and that's Joe Biden's deeply felt empathy. At this time when we're experiencing tragedy upon tragedy, we need a president who understands and cares about what we're going through. Few public servants have endured so many of life's most heartbreaking losses, the loss of a wife and 2 children. Even fewer have found purpose in that pain by easing the pain of others. That's what he does. Decent, honest, caring, effective. Any of those words apply to the current occupant of the Oval Office? Joe shows us how you put one foot in front of the other, not to run away from the past, but to keep moving towards the future. And what does that future look like? Imagine a world with universal pre-K, debt forgiveness for educators, triple Title I, expanded community schools, supports with kids with special needs, high-stakes testing thrown out the window, charter school accountability, public colleges and universities tuition-free for families who earn less than $125,000. That's not from an AFT resolution, although it could be. That's straight from the Democratic Party platform born out of the Bernie Joe Unity Task Force recommendations we helped draft. That platform, including its embrace of labor unions, its plans to revitalize American manufacturing and rebuilding our aging infrastructure, health care as a right, its commitment to creating a path for citizenship for 11 million people, eliminating greenhouse gas emissions, reversing the Trump tax cuts, and ending mass incarceration is, as Bernie Sanders has said, the most progressive Democratic platform in history. It's a plan to build back better and reimagine what society should look like. It's time to give Joe Biden the chance to enact that plan as president with a teacher, Dr. Jill Biden, at his side. And we will need a Senate on his side and ours as well. Without it, Mitch McConnell will keep throwing sand in the gears of government and packing the courts with judges driven by ideology, not the rule of law. Okay, you're saying, right now the polls look good for Biden. People recognize that President Trump has failed our country, and we're competing in Senate races across the country. But the only poll that counts is the election result. And we can't just win. We need to win decisively. We know votes will get suppressed. There will be broken machines, closed precincts, and voter roll purges. We know more disinformation campaigns will be unleashed. And does anyone doubt that Donald Trump will do everything he can to hold on to power. We need to win and win decisively. Democracy is on the ballot. In 2 of the last 5 presidential elections, the candidate who won the popular vote didn't become America's president. We can't let that happen now. So, just like in 2018, when we made such inroads in states and in the House of Representatives, we need to win the presidency, take back the Senate, and win local elections from judges and DAs to state legislatures and school boards. This is our shot to make real change, and we are not throwing away our shot. Okay, spoiler alert, Lin-Manuel Miranda and Joe Biden will be with us on Thursday. AFT members have already made thousands of calls during the primaries to get out the vote. That's great, but more is needed. This has been an era of disinformation, lies, and a dangerous erosion of trust. But guess what? You are trusted by your family, your friends, and your community, and your fellow union members and colleagues. Nothing cuts through that information like the people you can trust. So, we need to do what our union has done for a century. Yes, it may be remote, but it's person-to-person organizing. We're aiming for 100,000 actions a month, phone calls, texts, and emails. We need every hand on deck, and to help, we've created a new program and the tools to help us get this done in this pandemic. Go to go.aft.org/action to see it right now. Let me give you an example. We lost Michigan by 10,000 votes in the last presidential election. Our members showed up. In 2016, 82% of our members were registered to vote and 73% voted. But some of the folks we are closest to did not. Changing outcomes like that is within our grasp. If even half our members inspired just one of their family or friends to vote, that outcome would have changed. We need you to come out. We need you to tap your circle, your book group, your sorority, your Facebook friends, your peeps, anyone that you know you can get to the polls or to vote by mail. And speaking of voting by mail, it's safe. Don't believe what Donald Trump tells you. After all, he voted by mail, and you better believe he wants to have his vote counted. This November 3rd, we need to vote like our lives depend on it, because they do. In the last 2 years, we've learned a lesson over and over that the founders of the AFT understood, that John Lewis and other leaders of the civil rights movement understood. Activism and elections build the power necessary to create a better life, a voice at work, and in our democracy. Activism changes the narrative, elections change policy, and together they change lives. I spoke earlier about finding hope in the protests for Black lives. I find hope in something else too. You and our activism, your activism and the union's activism. From the moment Donald Trump was elected, to his choice of Betsy DeVos, to the Janus decision, to school shootings, austerity, and countless other challenges, AFT members have stood up for what is right. We saw it in the teacher strikes from the hollers of West Virginia to the alleys of Chicago and during the rainstorms of Los Angeles. We saw it in the bus tours in Florida and New York, the demonstrations in Minnesota and Massachusetts, in Michigan and New Mexico, calling on officials to fund our future. We engage community, and together we change the narrative about public education, we change policy, and we change lives. The other side knows the power of collective action. That's why they go after us. It's no mystery why Betsy DeVos sat in on oral arguments in the Janus and the Espinoza Supreme Court cases. She knows that public education and the right to join a union empower people. And she knows that when people are empowered, even her billions of dollars won't be a match for our millions of voices. We know it too, that together we can accomplish things that are impossible on our own. That's why people are joining the AFT. We've organized 59 new units with close to 12,000 workers in 21 states since the last convention. And since the Janus decision, the AFT has seen a net growth of more than 44,000 members, including 4,000 new members since the start of COVID. I am hopeful, despite everything we're going through. There is a basic goodness in the souls of Americans. We must have leadership that matches that goodness. Together, we can temper the health, economic, and racial justice crises that are tearing our community apart. Together, we can rethink, reimagine, and rebuild our country. Together, we have the power to defeat Donald Trump and elect Joe Biden. Together, we will care, fight, show up, and vote for a better life for all Americans. Thank you.
The community, it's every single person in LA. We're all in this together.
We taught Los Angeles and the United States how to fight and how to win.
Same struggle, same fight. We are in the fight of our lives for a fair contract.
The austerity narrative is really, really destructive.
We must have a comprehensive plan to immediately address the environmental hazards plaguing our schools.
So we come before you to serve these children, Lord God. We ask for a miracle today. It just breaks my heart as a mom. We're bearing witness. We're witnesses of what's really happening. We also bought teddy bears with books to read and blankets.
To the President of the United States, we will make sure that documents and bids are not nameless or faceless or can be demonized.
We didn't just take this administration's decision lying down. We came out and we fought, and the fight came all the way to the Supreme Court.
This new village, right in the middle of town, is a turning point for Welch, for McDowell County.
The student debt issue is growing. You're taking advantage by a system of high interest rates and snowball debt that it pretty much sets you up to fail. I'm so grateful for the AFT and the student debt.
How do we elevate teachers' voice and judgment to change the culture so that the teaching profession is marked by trust, respect, and the freedom to teach?
You need to be a nurse and a social worker and a counselor in every single school. You cannot teach a class of 50 or 40.
Every day we've gotten stronger out here. Every day the crowds have gotten bigger.
Hell yeah, we're in it for the long haul.
We demanded more for our school communities and the students who deserve it.
because we've had 20 years of disinvestment in our public schools. And today we demand more to fund our future.
We are marching and taking it to the State House, so it's a great day. You see this energy out here? It's great. Woo, students! We want contracts that our students deserve.
The district has the money and we need the support.
We're going to invest in school infrastructure. We're going to bring community schools.
We're going to fight for the young people around this table.
Make a difference for those 230,000 kids getting school breakfast.
We can elect somebody like me who will work like the devil to put our state back together again.
People respect teachers. Core to this campaign as a 20-year teacher has been Education Minnesota.
I am an AFT member. AFT and the members that it represents have got to have a voice in the setting of the agenda.
We are here today to support our community in demanding justice for George Floyd. And that's why we must put an end to systemic and institutional racism. We must put an end to the school-to-prison pipeline.
We come together for this journey of justice, but it's not just a journey of justice, it's really a defense of our democracy.
No hate, no fear.
Hate's the new thing. The President of the United States who seems to make it okay and acceptable to say these things, to think these things. This is a show that we are better than this.
Why, 65 years after Brown v. Board of Education, we are still having a fight?
This takeover goes against every principle that our country was founded on.
There are clearly other school districts that are worse. When the state has consistently tried to take over districts that are lower income, students of color, that tells me that they have a separate agenda. It's not about making education better for us.
It is about making sure that our members and our leaders can actually have real conversations.
We're fighting for the future of our children.
Making educational opportunity real.
It is so great to be in the House of Labor.
We just want to know how your administration will secure the safety of students in special ed.
We have been under attack for the past 15 years.
So I understand why you're mad.
So I wanted to hear a little bit more about your plan to address student loan debt.
Lots of presidential candidates say, I want to be the, education president. And today is about how are we going to do this?
We rally around our teachers.
Why doesn't my school have money for a librarian or a music teacher?
How will you commit to fully funding IDEA?
If Jill and I end up in the White House, we're not going to ever have a better friend for education.
Betsy DeVos, let's strengthen our schools, not destroy them.
Since the current administration, I feel like public education is just taking a beating.
As educators, this is the most important election.
Joe Biden understands where we are now, and he understands all the things that we need to do to get there.
No matter what, I leave my house and I go to my hospital and I do what I have to do in this battle against this pandemic.
Our job is to fix people, but we see all these people and they're broken, and frankly, so are we.
We don't want to say that we're weak and that we can't do this, but every day we have to come back and be strong for our patients.
One of the things we're doing are delivering meals instead of picking up kids on our routes.
Bye, girls. See you Monday.
We are doing good for the community, keeping the kids safe and involved and fed.
Happy first day of ELA. The kids miss each other. We miss the kids.
Right now is really like a great time for kids to be able to do really fun hands-on projects.
When I don't see a student in class, then I email them. If they don't respond to my email, then I call them.
We're making sure that kids in transitional housing have a library. have books to read. And if people are physically distant, what better thing can we do than keep them connected with the love of reading?
Still have individuals who are contracting the virus and with limited amount of PPE.
This means so much to us on the front line.
We have a special obligation to those who have stood up and have gone to work to protect everyone else.
These negotiations are all about safety.
In the middle of a pandemic, why they're not giving us adequate PPE, why nurses had to wear garbage bags.
Our governor is saying that we have schools that are ready to go. Our schools are not ready to go because we know it's going to cost more money.
We are trying to get through the HEROES Act and through a second stimulus on the Senate side.
Class sizes are between 30 and 40 students. If we don't have enough teachers, we aren't going to be able to split students up into smaller groups.
Pass the HEROES Act. I want to go back to school safely.
These are really troubling and scary times. And what we need to do is both help people get through, at the same time make sure that we can buffer the country and particularly working families so that when it's safe to take the gloves off and the masks off, that we can come out with a better future for all of our children. So the video you just watched, and I'll take my mask off again. We are in a studio in Virginia because we wanted to make sure that we had the capacity, the internet capacity, the other capacity, the cameras, the screens, to do this virtual convention. And we'll see over the course of the 3 days how it goes. We made a commitment to make sure that we had both programming that was relevant for our membership, important to our membership, having speakers that were, and also made sure that we could have the resolutions and the votes and the voices of our members and our delegates that we know our delegates come to see as the tradition in the AFT. So hopefully over the 3 days, you will be nourished, you will be excited, you will cry like I've been for the last few days in looking at all these different videos of all the things that you have done and that we have done together. But we're on this journey together for these 3 days. Whether we are, remote in distance, we are not remote in engagement. And it's hard not to be with all of you, but, one day we will be back together. And hopefully, as I said before, with a new president and a new Senate, and having a House of Representatives that has the robustness that it does right now. But one person that I want to just talk about for a minute, who in some ways captures that kind of energy you saw in that video, the kind of energy that is the state of our union and the soul of our union, the commitment from generations to generations. That person is Dr. Lorretta Johnson. Now, Lorretta told me months and months ago that she was not going to run again. And I really wanted to plan something special at the convention to honor her, to honor not only her work, but her life. Because she's not just the secretary treasurer of our union. She's just not my dear friend and sister. We bicker like family, and we love each other intentionally like family. But very few people will leave behind a legacy quite like Lorretta, or Dr. J, as many of our staff call her. While there can be no doubt that she's earned this retirement over and over and over again, Lorretta's departure leaves a hole in my heart and in the heart of our movement. She's a powerhouse in every sense of the word. Her decency, her keen eye for bargaining, for finding the solution, her familial spirit. She has helped build not only the Baltimore Teachers Union into what it is today, not only the Maryland Federation of Teachers into what it is today, but our whole union into what it is today. Lorretta never forgets where she came from, but she's always looking to strive for what needs to be, what that promise of public education needs to be, and transcend it into the action that it needs to be, the decency that it needs to be for children and for the people who work in public education, whether it be a teacher or a bus driver. She remembers what it's like to earn $2.25 an hour without benefits as a teacher's aide. But she also knows how to build power for working people and exercise that power in City Hall, in the legislative bodies, and in the halls of Congress. I asked Lorretta to run with me in 2008 when it was clear both Ed McElroy and Nat LaCour were retiring at the same time. I sought Lorretta out. I wasn't taking no for an answer. I wanted a running mate who understood the union from ground up, who had lived experiences that were different than my own, but one where we could connect together seamlessly, who understood how to organize a local, how to go out on strike, how to negotiate tough contracts, who could give voice to educational paraprofessionals who sometimes feel so invisible all throughout the country. Activism is in Lorretta's blood. She understands the importance of connecting directly with our members, the importance of making sure that all of our members see the power they have through their union and through their right as citizens to vote. But she also understands what has happened in light of racial inequity and intolerance and how to make that better over and over again. You can imagine a lesbian as president and an iconic black woman as secretary-treasurer. She remains a giant, an icon in the labor movement, and my friend. We will miss her terribly. Not that she's not going to be out of our lives, because we got a lot of work that we plan for her to do. But for these and so many other reasons, there's no one better who stands for what Bayard Rustin stood for. The understanding that through unions and a justice movement, we can make a better life for people. That's the Bayard Rustin Human Rights Award. That's what Bayard did, most notably as he organized the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Justice. This award is given at every one of our national conventions in collaboration with the AFT's Human Rights and Community Relations Department. The award honors activists who have distinguished themselves as exemplars of selfless commitment to fighting for human rights, for dignity, and for justice. Over the years, the Bayard Rustin Award has been awarded to notable human rights activists such as Zeto Wah, the celebrated activist, legislator, and leader of the Hong Kong Paraprofessional Teachers Union, and to the late U.S. Representative and civil rights icon, John Lewis. Because we are in this social distancing moment, Lorretta will come up to this podium momentarily and receive this award. But we want to show you a video first so we can do this seamless transition.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to introduce Dr. Lorretta Johnson, a paraprofessional from Baltimore.
Thank you so much.
For 54 years, as an active member and leader of the American Federation of Teachers, Lorretta Johnson has worked tirelessly to promote workers' rights, civil rights.
When AFT shows up, it's justice. And that's what we're fighting for.
Human rights,
great speech.
And economic rights. Lorretta has expanded collective bargaining rights for thousands of AFT members. Lorretta has been a champion for paraprofessionals and strengthened the AFT's voice and power around the country and the world.
We will continue to support and be there to help you, because you might come to help us one day.
Under Loretta's leadership, the AFT has grown to become one of the most effective and powerful unions in the United States.
Who are we? AFT! Who are we? AFT!
The street that the marchers marched up in 1965 from the Selma to Montgomery.
We come together for this journey of justice, but it's not just a journey of justice, it's really a defense of our democracy.
During her 12 years of leadership at the AFT, Lorretta has been a fierce advocate for racial equity.
Understand why we have so much gun violence.
The community issues, trying to have those voices heard.
In 2014, Lorretta chaired the AFT Racial Equity Task Force, leading the AFT to become the first public sector union in modern history to issue a substantive report with concrete recommendations to achieve racial equity.
We have a window of opportunity to change the narrative in this country.
During her 30-year tenure as an AFT vice president, Lorretta continued her indefatigable leadership by serving simultaneously as president of the Baltimore Teachers Union's paraprofessional chapter for 35 years and as president of AFT Maryland for 17 years. Lorretta started her career as a teacher's aide in 1966 at a Baltimore elementary school where she earned $2.25 an hour and received no benefits.
There was no dignity. We weren't treated very well. Parents wanted a voice and to be treated with dignity and respect as a worker.
She organized the paraprofessionals into the Baltimore Teachers Union, and in 1970 negotiated their first contract, which laid the groundwork for her union activism in the Baltimore community and the state of Maryland, and countless contracts have been negotiated by her over the years. Loretta's philosophy of activism can be summed up in a story she likes to tell.
If you see me in the fight with a bear, help the bear.
She uses her fearless intellect, moxie, and grace to speak truth to power, improve the working and economic conditions for paraprofessionals, working families.
Hi, I'm Lorretta Johnson from the American Federation of Teachers, and we're out knocking on doors asking you to vote.
And with sheer persistence and will, the democratic bonds of our country.
From Korea.
Loretta's contributions extend beyond the AFT to include being vice president of the AFL-CIO. Lorretta has earned many national awards during her over 5 decades of work.
I'm honored to be re-elected as your Secretary-Treasurer.
Her greatest award has always been her family. That includes her late husband, Leonard, her 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and 7 great-grandchildren. We honor Loretta's 54 years of leadership in promoting the dignity of AFT members and working people in our own country and around the world, and for her many years of service to the AFT, to its members, and to the labor movement. the American Federation of Teachers offers our deep and everlasting gratitude to Secretary-Treasurer Lorretta Johnson.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you for that introduction, for this award, and for your bold leadership. It has been a privilege and an honor to serve alongside you as an officer of this great union. And over the past decade, our vision and the labor movement have weathered many storms and anti-workers attacks. And we have come through that stronger and more united. Randy, with your leadership, we have built AFT into a powerful voice for paraprofessionals and school-related employees, for the teachers, for higher education faculties and staff, and for healthcare professionals, and for the public service workers. I am proud and grateful for the opportunity to be part of this remarkable leadership team. But most of all, Randy, thank you for your friendship. You have been a colleague, a partner, a sounding board, and a confidant. And before I go any further, I have to take a moment to honor the life and courage of Congressman John Lewis. I was so hurt to hear that he was gone. But I'm glad he lived to witness this moment in our nation as people all over are standing up and insisting that Black Lives Matter. In fact, one of the last things he did publicly was stand into the streets in the nation capital, right near the White House, that had been named and painted the words, Black Lives Matters. Congressman Lewis and leaders like him spent decades and decades of trying to crack the stone of racism and fighting for justice. Those of us who came up in the 60s and attended the March on Washington and remember John Lewis as a student leader who, at the age of 23, was considered a national leader in the civil rights movement. He was the youngest speaker that day in August on the March on Washington. I first met John Lewis back in those days when I was a young lady. And I can't tell you that John Lewis had been a stalwart ally. And he went on to become a legislator who was known among his peers as a conscience of the House of the Representatives. Whether marching in Alabama or legislating in the halls of Congress, John Lewis faithfully fought to make what he always called the beloved community in America to reality. To Congressman Lewis, the beloved community would be a society based on justice, where every human being is valued and is worthy of dignity. I'm saddened that he can't be around to see Joe Biden elected president this November, and that he didn't get to see the conclusion of the fight to destroy racism so that we can all be part of his beloved community. However, John Lewis can rest knowing that he fought the good fight. And we have to carry exactly what he told us, both in what he said and what he did. Congressman Lewis practiced what he preached. He always says, when you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, you have to speak up. And you have to say something. You have to do something. He told us, get in the way and to make good trouble. And the best way for all of us to honor the life of Congressman John Lewis is to keep fighting for what is right. And this November, we can honor him by voting and mobilizing everyone we know to vote for Joe Biden. Anyone who knows me can tell you I'm not normally one to cry, but I'm going to try to get through this without crying. The speech that Randi gave have lifted me, and I'm so overwhelmed right now with happiness and gratitude for all of the years that I've been blessed to serve as a labor leader, a trade unionist, fighting together with so many wonderful sisters and brothers in this movement for the rights of working people, to give a voice for the voiceless, and to build power for powerless. I have met and worked with some of the most dedicated people, capable, decent, compassionate men and women, including the late Bayard Rustin. Bayard, along with A. Philip Randolph, two of the great American leaders in the American labor and civil rights, organized the landmark 1963 March on Washington for jobs and freedoms, where Dr. King stood on the steps of Lincoln Memorial and talked about his dream for a better America. Because of the march, we got the Civil Rights Acts of 1964 and the Voting Rights Acts of 1965. The idea for a march to bring thousands of people to the nation capital to end racial discrimination goes all the way back to the early 1940s. And its vision and the work of Bayard and Mr. Randolph. They were giants in the fight for racial economic justice, and I had the honor of knowing them both. And most importantly, I had the opportunity to learn from them. And whenever I had the chance to be in their presence and listen to the stories about their journey for justice, I had the sense of sitting at the feet of the elders. Mr. Randolph spoke about his fight for union recognitions and the rights for black workers during the 1920s when he organized and led the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. In those days, the labor movement still mostly segregated and often excluded black workers. After Mr. Randolph died, Bayard continued to work, and as an ally with the labor movement and with the AFT, he was an organizer, an intellectual, and remembered us as a courageous leader in the fields of human rights, civil rights, labor, and democracy. Throughout his life, he defended democracy and opposed authoritarianism. Whenever it exits from South Africa to Poland, and because of his lifelong dedication, the AFT presented Bayard Rustin with our Human Rights Award. This year, I am so humble to receive the Bayard Rustin Human Rights Award, which bears the name of the man I admire so greatly. So Randi and our Executive Vice President, Evelyn DeHouza, and to all of the AFT vice presidents, and to the members of the Human and Civil Rights Committee, thank you for honoring me with this award. Over the last few months, I've had countless conversations with colleagues, friends and families, members about my upcoming retirement. And the question that just about everybody asks is, how do you feel about retiring after so many years? 54 years, that is a lifetime. And this work truly has been my life. The answer is, I feel good. Knowing that I've spent the last 54 years fighting the good fight, working to make life better for children and families. That is what the union work is all about. And the things about union work is that it never leaves you. Even when you retire, you never really leave the work. It's always a part of you, and it's always going to be a part of me. When I started out back in 1966, working as a teacher aide in Baltimore City, I was a young wife, married to the love of my life, Leonard Johnson, who I met when I was 12 and married him when I was 18, and a mother to my 3 boys. I was making $2.25 an hour with no benefits. Even back then, that really wasn't much. Civil rights activist Angela Davis says, and I quote, "I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept." And that's exactly what I set out to do. I believe that the work of paraprofessionals needed to be uplifted and valued. I believe that we must be recognized as important members of the education team who deserve to be paid fairly and treated with dignity and respect. So I started getting folks together and organizing. And 2 years later, in 1968, the Baltimore Teachers Union became the first local in the AFT to represent paraprofessionals. We negotiated our first contract in 1970. And I had the privilege of serving as president of BTU for 35 years, including 17 years as the president of both BTU and AFT Maryland. Over the next 3 decades, we continue to work of building the union and extending union rights to more school employees. We work to strengthen the voices of paraprofessional school support personnel, parents, and community members in school-based decision-making. And we built real political activism and power so we could influence the policies and affect our lives at work and beyond. That's what union work is about. And one of our accomplishments over the last 54 years that give me a great sense of fulfillment is how the role of the PSRP has grown and it evolved in our union. After my remarks, I'll cue in a video of our AFT heroes this year. Her name is Yolanda Fisher from Texas. And you can see for yourself what kind of work the PSRP do every day and what important role they play in the community that they serve. But there was a time when some folks didn't think paraprofessionals and school support personnel could be leaders. I remember being told that I was an exception. The truth is, I'm not an exception. I am an example of what people can achieve when they're given a fair opportunity. That is what the labor movement must always be about, expanding opportunity to all. And as I prepare to begin the next phase of my life, I feel good. I've done what I set out to do, and I know that the PSRP will pick up where I left off and keep right on leading. I'm confident that whoever comes behind me is prepared to move forward and advance the value of AFT and the union movement, and the union that I love. Thank you. So much years of my service and support and love. It's an amazing opportunity to serve and leading by empowering others. It's been a great honor. And I won't say goodbye, but I'll say farewell for now. Thank you, and let's cue in the video.
My name is Yolanda Fisher. I'm a cafeteria manager at T.W. Brown Middle School in Dallas, Texas. I've been doing that job for 26 years. And doing that job, I noticed that a lot of kids are going hungry. And a lot of kids are coming to school dirty, in need of a lot of things. You know, sometimes clothes, sometimes, you know, just to wash their face. Sometimes they need school supplies. You know, they need, even when we feed them breakfast, lunch, dinner, but we have also been having them to give them food to go home with, to eat at night, you know, just to get them through the next day. And on the weekends, we give them a backpack full of food just to get them through the weekend. So I noticed it has increased, you know, the longer I have been there. During the pandemic, we stepped up to feed the kids while the school was closed. But we noticed that a lot of adults was going hungry. So we also started feeding adults. And when I first started, you know, we didn't know how great the need was. So the meals I was making, it started out with just 75 meals. And every week it would go up. It went up to 300. Then it went up to 400. Then it went up to 6. And then it went up to 8. I got up to 1,400 meals. So as a society, as Americans, we need to help our neighbors. As a country, you know, we said we're the land of plenty, but it's not looking like plenty. We need to do better, making sure that everybody has everything that they need. Just the basic needs of life.
Hi, everyone, and my name is Randi Weingarten, and I'm going to take my mask off now. But, you know, when we're inside, we should all be wearing one. But right now, I'm physically distant, and in some ways very distant from all the panelists that I'm about to introduce. We have 5 people on this panel. We were supposed to have a 6th person on this panel, but this is what happens in the lives of AFT nurses and AFT healthcare professionals. Obina Okonoko was supposed to be on our panel, but he has been pulled off to do a last-minute overtime shift. And that's the case of so many of our healthcare professionals and our nurses right now. So what I wanted to do first is say thank you that you're all here, but to get into the conversation, by asking you briefly one thing about COVID and about the crisis that frankly surprised you. You know, something that our members all throughout the country who are watching this, that they may not know about. Like just one thing, top of the mind. What surprised you about all of this? Good, bad, indifferent? What, or, you know, just something that we might not even know. So why don't we start with Julia?
Great. Well, I think as an ICU nurse, the thing that shocked me and a lot of my colleagues is how quickly people that come in go from just having a cough, some fever, to within 3 to 4 hours in front of your eyes need to be on a ventilator. And once in a blue moon as an ICU nurse, you'll see that. But they're usually very chronically ill people that you've dealt with before. These are, many of them, healthy people, and you'll be talking to them and have just admitted them and have to call for help to intubate them and put them on a ventilator. And that's like nothing in my 25 years of nursing experience that I've come across time and time and time again. And that is a very scary thing that we were just inundated with and are still inundated with.
Thank you, Julia. Jax, thank you.
Yeah, I'm a progressive care nurse, so we handle the COVID patients until they go get intubated with Julia. What surprised me the most, I think, is how the hospital handled COVID, because, you know, like, we're told to wear masks and all stay 6 feet apart and social distancing and all that. But if you come into the hospital, we may or may not test you for COVID. And we might put you in a shared room where you're literally 3 feet from another person with only a curtain to separate you. And all the rules that have been suggested go out the window when you go into a hospital. It just seems odd.
And part of it is, you know, look at what's happening right now, where even in places where you actually have some tests, it takes, what, a week to get the test results back? So how can you actually do 2 weeks? How can you actually do testing and tracing and isolate? How can you do tracing and isolation in a situation like that? Nora, what surprised you in this moment?
As nurses, we were frightened and felt betrayed that our management didn't have our back, that CDC, the DOH were lowering their guidelines to match our supply versus maintaining our guidelines and trying their best to enhance our supply. So from a work standpoint, that was very frightening, that we just felt helpless. But physically, the chest X-ray on these patients literally looked like somebody crumbled crushed glass and sprinkled it in the lungs. So to see that what would appear to any healthcare worker irreversible damage, you know, to see that and know that it was so helpless for so many people to actually be able to recover from this was very, very disturbing and heartbreaking, because I never saw an X-ray look anything like that before. So again, it was a lot of different things, you know, really hit us. But those two stand out, you know, like thinking that, you know, because again, with H1N1, when that came out, you know, it seemed like we had supplies to the hilt. You know, we were wearing like moon suits, you know, for those patients. And when this came about, they're like, oh, sorry, here's your N95 for the month. What? You know, when it says right on the box, one-time use only.
Right. So. And you know, not to be political, but it was a different federal administration with H1N1. There's a different federal administration with Ebola. And, you know, there was a lot more coordination about what was needed and getting it to people, you know, as quickly as possible. So, Jacinta, what surprised you?
Different is we were told you had to have, you had other things that comorbidities. And what was the aha moment for most of the nurses in my area, because we're in a rural area, is these were 25 and 30-year-old people. And they were walking, and yes, they needed oxygen, but in a day or two, they were on a ventilator because their oxygen kept dropping and there was nothing you could do about it. But as we're now in an area where kids are getting together because they thought things were opening, and now we have high school students that tested positive with football, and they just had a party with kids, and they have a lot of those have come back tested positive. So people are not taking it serious. They just, they're in my area, they think wearing a mask is violating your rights. And all it is a safety mechanism, but we know that. But you find yourself really, really defending yourself to people that should know better.
And again, that it starts from the top in terms of what Trump has done.
It does. And, the panic, first you see one or two cases, but as we, a small hospital, we're seeing where we might have 10 beds, and out of the 10 people you have here, 5 of them are positive, and they're on ventilators. So you're seeing us pick up more shifts. We're tired, but it just can't just turn your back on it, because this is what we do. We take care of patients that need us.
Crystal, what either surprised you or was just different and that you didn't expect?
Well, I know when it first happened here in Baltimore County, when the groundswell started going on about coronavirus, I was one of maybe a handful of people that volunteered to take this project on. We didn't get a lot of information. We didn't know exactly what coronavirus was. And what really surprised me was the amount of gratitude that people would come and they would roll down their windows. They would be incredibly frightened and they would say, "Thank you." And there were days where I would get a full night's sleep and wake up emotionally exhausted because I didn't want to go to work because I'm tired of COVID. But when you get that thank you, it gave you the energy you needed to push through that day and then to get up and do it all over again the next day.
The energy, the emotional, the emotions, it's just remarkable. It's so awesome. I know I started by talking about how, we're on the front lines, we're trying to fight for safety, we're trying to do these things, but this fight became really personal. For me, there was a conversation I had with the leaders of about 40 of our healthcare locals. But the one common thread, other than the anxiety and the magnitude of what we were facing and you were facing on the front line, the one common thread was the absence of PPE. We kept on hearing, we don't have enough. And given this virus, we need personal protective equipment. And so we did what, unions do best. And if you ask me, I have never been a supply clerk before in my life. I probably wouldn't have known how to fill out a procurement piece of paper. And we said, we're not going to wait for philanthropy or for the Congress to do something. We just went into the AFT budget and spent about $3 million securing, we got 50,000 face shields, we got 1 million surgical masks, we have the N95s, some of which have come already, some of which are still in, which we've paid for, still in some warehouses that we can't get yet.
Yeah.
And we'll do it again. But tell me, I know, Nora, some of the, and I know some of the folks in PEF and in UUP, both of whom are part of the the New York State medical center hospital system upstate and Stony Brook and downstate. And you are so pivotal at Stony Brook. So what did it mean? Like, what did you think when you initially heard, okay, so Randy's going to look for PPE, but then what did you think when we found it and we got it and we, when they landed at JFK, I was so excited. Oh my God, it's on a plane. Oh my God, it landed from JFK. Oh my God, get it in the truck so nobody takes it. But what did you think?
No, it was a great sense of relief. I mean, the first time I got an SOS call was the last weekend in March, where a nurse in the emergency room called and said, we have no more small N95s. They're telling us to wear a bandana. It was a feeling of relief. And they're like, wow, I can't believe our union's doing that. And I can't tell you how many times that I kind of did that little, and that's why we have a union. And like the light bulbs went on, But again, just knowing that, there was going to be relief. And I know my brothers and sisters, particularly at SUNY Downstate, who, received, a good bulk of those masks and shields and things of that nature. We're just so alleviated because, again, this was around the time the garbage bags were being worn, and one of, the nurse managers wound up passing away, a young fellow. So again, it really made us feel like we were cared about because, so much with the rules changing on a constant basis and our managers telling us in emails that we're just going to consider everybody with COVID, so just wear a surgical mask. What? To know that it seemed like you guys had our back, whereas our managers, we lost our faith in our management. So it was timely and wonderful, and I think it's put a renewed faith in unions as well, because a lot of people, again, if you don't use it, it doesn't mean much to you type of thing, but if the union is overwhelmingly, obviously helping you, they have no choice but to understand what unionism is. And I think it was again, it's a terrible thing, a pandemic, but I think it was a nice wake-up call and a refreshing outlook for people as far as unions go. So thank you so much.
Great. But that gets me to the last question that I want to just ask Crystal about, which is this. So what do we do about this on a national level? Like, would it matter if there was a different president?
Well, first of all, absolutely. I think this president has left the whole medical community, the frontline workers in particular, disheartened and demoralized to sit and watch a president divide us as a nation during a time when he should be bringing us together, basically by willfully. And I'm not sure if it's not a measured and concerted effort to disregard top public health officials like Dr. Fauci and scientific evidence that proves that just by wearing a mask, you can curtail the transmission of this virus. I think a different administration would definitely prove to be a benefit to all of us because they would be bringing us together. They would be looking at the scientific data and encouraging people to wear a mask. I mean, this president has basically made, and I have one handy here because I just did my laundry, a mask as a political statement. So now you're on one side or another based upon whether or not you wear a mask. And that should never be the case. the most patriotic thing that anybody could do at this very moment is wear a mask. I'm not wearing this mask for me. I'm wearing this mask for someone else. And someone else would be doing the same for me.
Yep.
That is what we need right now. We need a leader that's not afraid to listen to people who are smarter than him and to go by scientific evidence that says, wear your mask. Wash your hands. Stay 6 feet apart from people if you are physically able. If not, make sure you have your mask on. That's what we need right now.
You know, one of the things you just said, Crystal, is about, you know, we've referred to Dr. Fauci, but we will be blessed to actually hear what he has to say, because tonight we are having Dr. Fauci at a town hall at 6:45 Eastern time tonight. Any of our members want to link to Facebook Live, we're going to have Dr. Fauci on to really answer our questions. And I've been studying up to, you know, because I'm really nervous about making sure I ask the right questions. And so he will be with us tonight, and not just for our convention delegates, but all of our members. And I'd like to, at this moment, just end today with looking at one other of our amazing heroes, Trung Lee, a nurse from Connecticut. And just as we end, take out your handkerchief and listen to Trung's story. Thank you, all of you. I so appreciate you, and we all of our members just are so grateful and so thankful.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you for all you do.
Thanks, Randy.
Thank you.
An issue that we have is because my wife and I are both nurses on the front lines, our hospital, we're needed there. And with childcare, you know, we're kind of waiting for that hit, that big hit to come. Our hospital now is having us reuse masks, put them in paper bags and tape them on the doors of the patients' rooms with our names on them. So, you know, we're reaching in and out of a dirty bag and putting it on until we find out the patient's positive, which could be a week later. You know, we're all on our unit. You know, we know what we signed up for. We're nurses. We're taking care of sick people. We know, like, we have the chance to get sick. We put on our happy faces, go from patient to patient, you know, taking care of them. But there is an undertone of dread throughout the whole unit, throughout the hospital, that this is something serious. You know, we're playing Russian roulette with our lives and our families' lives by reusing these masks. It's definitely not fun. I don't recommend it for anybody. Like all these protesters who are out there wanting to go get a haircut. I'm hoping whatever happens after this, you know, it changes the U.S. in that, you know, we realized like what's important, what's not important, how we need each other to survive. If it wasn't for my union president and other members of my union officers fighting for me, I don't know where I would be. You know, a lot of people, they shoot down unions and you don't realize, like, behind the scenes when you need them, they're there.
Thanks.
So as you can see, we are all wearing our masks and washing our hands a lot, and because we want to make sure that the cameramen, men and women in this room are safe and that we're all really taking care of one another. But that is who we are as a union. So before we close the first general session of our convention, I want to say to all of you, thank you. We know we've gotten a little bit of some of our delegates have not been able to sign in with their badge numbers and things like that. During the morning sessions, you can always watch on live stream if there's a problem, and we are working obviously between now and 2:30, our first business section, to make sure that all of that works. Our first business section, just like when we were in person in 18, we're going to start with a role play so that we all kind of learn how to use the new rules and the virtual rules. But for those of you who are on committees, they are the same as we've done on committees, and we're basically going to confirm what the Executive Council had already passed in June, I think, about the rules. And we'll start ultimately after we do the role play and adopt the rules. We'll start with the constitutional amendments. What we're trying to do is, in the morning, will be program. When I say the morning, it's 11 to 1 Eastern Standard Time. It's the morning in, in Central and in the West. And then the business sections will be 2:30 to 5:30 each day. And if we end earlier on Thursday, we end earlier. And if we end later, we end later. But that's how the drill will be for these 3 days. I'm very appreciative of all of you for going with the flow here, because the one consistency we know is that with technology, there will be glitches. And, we're just hoping that we'll have as few glitches as possible. I want to thank Leah Daughtry, Reverend Daughtry, for the invocation again. I want to thank Wayne for that. Really, it was hard for me to I didn't see it before, even though it was on video. I just really want to thank him for that really moving introduction. You heard Lorretta and just her power and the privilege it's been to work with her for all these years. And you saw these, amazing heroes of healthcare that we had in that panel, as well as as well as our AFT heroes, both Yolanda and Trung. We will end with a video as we end, but before we, with a video that, you may not cry, but I cry every time I see it, of teachers and their students. But before we close with that video, I just want to mention the brothers and sisters that we have from our international unions in Argentina, Australia, Bahrain, Belgium, Canada, France, Germany, Ireland, Israel, Italy, Jamaica, Mexico, Portugal, South Korea, the UK, and Zimbabwe, who are all watching virtually. Many of us in both Education International as well as PSI, Public Service International, have been working together a lot. And when we talk about knowing what is happening in the rest of the world, it's because we're on Zoom calls and we've done the International Summit on the Teaching Professions with our colleagues around the world. And so I just want to say thank you to all of our international colleagues from being with us. And to everyone, look, I hope the next few days both summon our courage and our activism and help move us to the fights that we need to do, as well as engaging in the democracy of our union. So I hope that that the last video we show today, you will enjoy as much as it has moved us. It's just a few of the moments we had early in the COVID lockdown, and just seeing, just like you saw with Yolanda and Trung and so many others of our members, just the amazing dedication, resilience, flexibility, and ingenuity, and caring and compassion of our members. Thank you, and I will see you at 2:30.
teachers at Glenwood really miss you just from the bottom of their hearts.
I miss each and every last one of you.
And that I know things may be a little confusing right now and a little scary.
It's been a long day without you, my friend. And I'll tell you all about it when I see you again.
Telling you guys to laugh, love, live, and stay strong.
I miss y'all so much. I'm bored out of my mind.
You'll grow. Through the hard times, we keep it smart, never gamble. Hop on the stage and spread your light like a candle.
How do I breathe without you? Feeling so cold. I'll be waiting right for you till the day you're home.
In the meantime, try and do something productive. Memorize the bones of the body. Learn to play a new instrument. Let us know what's going on. We want to hear from you. We really do. We miss you.
11:15, we'll go over kind of what we want to do for the week.
We are, in a matter of days, fundamentally changing everything about education.
In all the good times, I find myself.
Teaching and learning online.
New ways for us to collaborate and communicate.
B squared minus 4AC.
Riddles are a type of poem.
I know you like, oh my God, Ms. Grimes, you really gonna give us some work to do.
If I start this YouTube channel, maybe I'll become a rich YouTuber. What do you think about that, kids?
Been a long day without you, my friend, and I'll tell you all about it.
I know, things are crazy right now, but remember, this will pass.
From where we began, oh, I'll tell you all about it. See you again.
This is a really crazy time, and I know a lot of you have so many questions, so do I.
And I wish we were back together again, but I know we will be soon.